259.
Hi, welcome members to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny meeting. As a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I've not received any request to use Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. Can I remind you that this meeting is being webcast, so please turn off or silence your mobile phones, and please remember to use the microphones when speaking. In case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. Members, can you make sure that you sign the attendance register that will circulate, and have there been any apologies received?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Neil Waite.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations of interest that you need to declare? No, thank you. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of January. Just to remind members, these minutes related to the meeting we had to scrutinise community safety and VAWDA-SV. Please could I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm they are an accurate account of the meeting. Moved and seconded, thank you. On to agenda item number 4, the action sheet. Becky, is there any update on the outstanding action?
So, thank you, Chair. The only action on the action sheet is the responses to recommendations from the last committee, which members will have all received by email. So, unless anyone's got any questions or queries on those.
Thank you. We'll just wait for the officers to come in to present the report. And we're on to agenda item 5, which is the introduction of a joint in-house civil parking and environmental enforcement service. I'd like to welcome officers Dave Thompson, Steve Jarrett, Craig Williams and Joe Lewis. They'll now provide members with a brief overview of the main points within the report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. A brief overview. I'll try very much to keep it brief. To do that, if I take members straight to paragraph 2.1 of the report, and if it's okay, we'll start there. Just some words around environmental enforcement and a little bit of the history there. As members know, it's a clean and green priority, and we've been working for a couple of years now with it's a clean and green priority, and since 2016 the council's invested in and introduced a private enforcement regime, and this is to combine with the positive work that's done elsewhere in the borough about street scene area working and that. And obviously between April 2016 and December 18, as a result of that, the authorities served the authority has received approximately 1,000 service requests about litter and 792 in relation to dog fouling. And obviously this demonstrates the public concern that continues there. And the authority does spend about £500,000 a year on cleaning the streets. And obviously we have the fortnightly area-based cleaning and litter picking schedule, and the fast response team also, which costs around £90,000 a year. So the authority is investing a lot of money in keeping the streets clean, and we also have an enforcement regime there. 2.3 gives us a bit of a history into the number of enforcement fixed penalty notices we've served for litter and dog control actions, and to 2.4 provides members with information around how many fixed penalty notices have been paid, etc. And that 2.4 there refers to it. That's about a payment rate of just under 70%. And whilst there's been some, not all the enforcement action has been seen as positive, there have been approximately 5% of the cases where enforcement actions have been taken have resulted in appeals, so that is actually comparatively low. And as you know, Safer Overviewing Scrutiny Committee has been heavily involved in that process and has made recommendations accordingly, which has informed this proposal today as well. Okay. We also reviewed the dog control orders which scrutiny were involved with, and obviously there were recommendations about greater enforcement in the borough as a result of that, and scrutiny also made recommendations that it supported the dog control orders as long as there was in-house enforcement available. Civil parking then became an issue when police informed the authority that it intended to formally withdraw. We put some data in the appendices there around the number of complaints in the area that had been received over the last year, 349, and there's further detail there in Appendix 1 for members. And even though the authority receives a comparatively low number of complaints now, when the authority starts doing this work, obviously that will increase. So 2.9 then, members, the authorities considered its response to the withdrawal of Gwent Police there, and have worked with other authorities on some consultancy to actually model out a scheme which has informed this report as well. SAFE has been involved with that as well and commented on it last year and supported it with in any house service adopting a zero tolerance approach, and made the recommendation of the joint service, which we're putting before members today as well. And obviously Cabinet approved that also. So that's brought us to where we are really. The executive members considered all that stuff, and we were instructed by the Chief Officer to model out the service as you've indicated today. 211 touches on the budget that's currently available for this work, and that will feed into the budget discussions later on. So 3.1 onwards really is the strategy and the proposals for the joint in-house service. The aims and objectives of the service are pretty straightforward. They're in 3.2, and the objectives really have been informed by SAFER and for members as far as the priorities around targeting civil parking offences and dog fouling hotspot areas, the PSPO work, and the litter hotspot areas as well. So the purpose of the model is a joined up, we've put options of two sizes of service with officers in that service which will be cross-authorised and trained to do any of the work anywhere else, but they'll be targeting the hotspot areas. Okay. I just want to say one thing we've asked scrutiny to do is to comment on the level of fines as well, and 3.5 was asked you to do that and provide you with information there around the fines. I think the 3.5, the civil parking fine, there is an option to reduce it. There's two options there, and the £70 and £35 if paid within 14 days, that is been adopted pretty standard across Gwent as all the authorities respond to the withdrawal of the police there. And in 3.6, we provide you with information in relation to litter and dog control offences and the options there for fines. That it's £100 maximum for the dog offences, and that's already set at that. And for litter, there is a range that we can go for, ranging from 75 to 150. And both of those we can have early repayment reductions if we want to. And at present, we do not operate that, so that's something for members to consider as well. Okay. 3.7 is important then, is that if members want to make a recommendation in relation to the levels of the fines, then obviously that will affect the financial modelling that we put into this report. The financial modelling that's been done has been in relation to the fine levels as that they stand. Okay. So, for an in-house service, officers will work to the authority's terms and conditions of employment. We'll be targeting patrols around litter, dog fouling and civil parking. And in some areas, we may need to double up the officers as well, because there may be health and safety issues. It can be a very confrontational job, certainly in relation to the environmental enforcement, where you need to approach the person and gain the name and address and all that sort of thing. So it could be that if we're having to double up, we've built in a reduction of the number of fines issued as a result of that. Moving on down to 3.11 and onwards, the back office function for civil parking. I think most authorities in Gwent are going with buying it in from RCT, that have got a system set up there, and we'll talk a little bit more about how the appeals process and how those fines are done in a moment. Currently, the back office function for environmental enforcement is for 3.12 is actually brought in with the Kingdom arrangements, but if we bring that in-house, we'll go back to when we first piloted it in 2013, and we'll do that in-house as well, and we've had the relevant discussions there as well. 3.13 talks about the appeals process, which we thought may be important to members to consider, and we put policies and protocols in appendices 2 and 3 there. 3.13.1, civil parking offences. There will be informal appeals that will be dealt with by the authority within 28 days, and if there's no grounds, then the enforcement process will continue. And in the event of non-payment, the motorists will receive a further notice that payment in full is due within a further 28 days, and the fine will then increase by a further 50%. At this point, the motorist can make a formal representation to the authority. If this representation is rejected, then the appellant has the option to appeal to the Traffic Penalty Tribunal. So those are pretty standard processes that have been, I think, adopted in other areas, and we'll be adopting those here, subject to approval. Environmental offences, well, we've obviously got our own experience of dealing with these, and we've put a policy in place now, which is in the appendices, and they can make an informal representation to the authority, outlining their objections, and that will be dealt with by the manager first, and then there'll be a further chance of appeal to be dealt with by the chief officer or the deputy or the executive member, and if that then is rejected and there's non-payment, then that is prosecuted in the magistrates' quarters now. Okay, so civil part with 3.14, we wanted to make sure members were fully aware of what non-payment of a fine could mean for an individual, because obviously that may cause them to refer to yourselves from time to time. And really, where civil parking offences enter this phase of cost recovery, each case is referred to the Traffic Enforcement Centre, which is in the south of England somewhere, which is a county court. And a court order is received to register the debt and obtain a warrant to collect the debt. And then it goes out to bailiffs, and you may have seen television programmes about this. And this is where costs start to ramp up. And we wanted to give members here an indication of how the non-payment of a £35 or a £70 fine can actually mount up there, as you can see at the bottom, to almost over £500. So there is that potential. As far as 3.15 environmental offences, so these are prosecuted at court because this is a criminal offence. So if they don't pay the fixed penalty notice, then they are prosecuted for the initial offence of littering or not complying with the dog control order. Okay? So what happens then, and typically in court where they're prosecuted, guilty pleas can incur a fine of £125 with a victim surcharge. That doesn't come to us. We don't get the fine then. The fines are kept by the court. And if we're awarded costs, typically of about £120 for the cost of us getting it to court, then defendants can often pay that by instalments. The court allows them to do that, and that's why there's a lag when we start this process off of court costs coming back in, and that's why in the modelling you've seen a build-up of that there. Okay. We then get into the costs of actually delivering the service a little bit. 3.16 is the set-up costs. And we've itemised those in the appendix, which I hope you can view. I think there may have been some printing problems when I printed them off again, so I hope you've been able to view those fully. So there's set-up costs there, and we'll come on to those in a minute. And obviously we'll be training the officers. At the moment, we're planning to host the service in T-Blind, and the measures of success, the key PRs, if you like, for the service are outlined in 3.19, which is obviously listed there for you. And then we get into the cost appraisal. So what we've done is just a little bit of background around the cost appraisal as to why we've gone with 9 officers with 7 enforcement officers, and then 6 with 4 enforcement officers. The reason we've got 7 enforcement officers in option 1 is that the consultants modelled out for CP initially 3 enforcement officers. And obviously what we were planning to do originally when we were just doing environmental enforcement in-house was to have an increase from 1 to 4 enforcement officers around the borough as well. So we've got an enforcement presence, taking into account scrutiny's views about the adequacy. We've only got 1 officer at the moment, so we'd have the equivalent of 4 doing environment, or they could do both depending how they're directed, and 3 doing civil parking based on the consultant's modelling. That's why there's option 1 is as it is. And obviously we've had to build in a manager, and we've had to build in some enforcement support officer, which would be dealing with keeping the database up to date about payments coming in, prosecution files and things like that. Okay. So then enforcement 2 is we wanted to give members the option of a smaller team, and we've just gone for 2 and 2. 2 for environmental and 2 for civil parking, and that's based on perhaps having an option which is potentially less cost for the authority. And what we've done then is we've modelled through there how many penalty charge notices those officers will serve based on the consultant's model, and that's for parking, and our experience of fixed penalty notices served for environmental enforcement over the last couple of years, having 1 officer, and the payment rates, and we've built in some information for doubling up there. So for both options then, I think if you go halfway down the table, you've got the total cost, of 391 across to 289, which is about a third of the way down the table. And then when we take off all the modelled income as a result of the enforcement action, then there's a total there of 217 across to 143 based for each option for the 3 years. There is a bit of a budget available of 57, and then netting that off, you've got the net additional cost on the net additional cost line there for each year for both options. We've built in some capital set-up costs for year 1. I think they include just about everything we've spent so far, and will include the highways, lineage and signage costs, and the consultancy costs are built in there, and they should be itemised in the appendices there as well. Okay. And it's going to be tight, it's going to be a challenge, but we're looking for a start date of July, and we would expect that if we can get going by July, an environmental enforcement would continue. But I think we've built in an allowance in the early years for civil parking for there to be a bit of a lead-in time before we start before we do the zero tolerance warnings and things like that. And that was built into the consultant's report as well, is it? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I hope that was brief enough. We've got the rest of the stuff is all the policy and the wellbeing stuff, which is largely repeating what we've referred to earlier on. And there's a summary of the financial side on 4.5. For members, and I think that could be a good point just to go through to section 6 of the report, and just to ask members for the scrutiny activity, which is to comment on the aims and objectives of the service, the size and scopes of the options that we presented, the model costs, the fixed penalty charge levels as well, and obviously anything else that members may wish to bring up. And the appendices is the information I referred to. I won't go through all of those unless you want me to. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Dave. Members, it's over to you for questions, and I think, Stuart, you are first question.
I wasn't here for the scoping, so pardon me if on this one. It says 219 is a significant number to be subject to prosecution. How much is this costing the council? Can we reduce this number?
Page 25.
2.4, yeah.
Paragraph 2.4.
Yeah.
So that's on the existing activity based with one officer, and its activity since the introduction of the enforcement or the reintroduction of the enforcement regime in May 17, and it's up to about the 18th of January this year as well. So that's quite a prolonged period of time, and that's the activity for, in the main, for one officer in the area. So 679 were paid and 219, that's about a payment rate of about 70%. And it's 219 of them have either been subject to prosecution or have prosecution pending. So the comment is you feel that's a lot. It's about an average payment rate for fixed penalty notices. So we would obviously hope that they would all pay, but no.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. So, staying on the same page, point 7, details 349 parking incidents, complaints from residents. The figures detail relates to 57% of the incidents and complaints. What would the other 43% percentage relating to?
What we've got here is an extract from a report from the police, and they produced this report for the whole of Gwent 2018, and I've pulled the Torvine extract out of there.
Oh, they just say another.
Can you just repeat the question? Sorry, Councillor, I apologise.
Okay, so basically what we're interested in is you've got 349 parking incidents, complaints from residents, and the figures detail relates to 57% of the incidents and complaints. So what was the other 43% relating to?
Not a parking expert, so please bear with me. Yeah, they were classed as other parking issues, and they were difficult. I think the police were unable to actually state what they were. So I think if you look at the table, which is on page 37 of the pack, is it that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Page 37, which is part of Appendix 1. You see there's a table there, and it says at the bottom there, it's like a bar chart, and the top one says other parking issues. So it's hard for me to actually state what those are, really.
So the police didn't outline it at all? No.
Steve, you'd like to come in yet?
Yeah, so I think Councillor Thomas has just made the point there. I think within the report that the police produced with those figures in, they said that they didn't receive enough information to be able to categorise that 37% into any of the categories that were below that.
Okay, thanks for that.
Just looking at those figures, if I take you to the top line on page 37, it says there that during 2018 there were 349 incidents reported involving parking, but this only accounted for 12.5% or 12.6% of all parking incidents within the force. So it would suggest that this 349 is just the tip of the iceberg for parking-related incidents. So the question I have there really is that this table that we have at the bottom of that page, and that if that only relates to the 349, and if that's only 10%, we've got about 3,000 reported parking incidents within there. So this problem would seem to be much bigger than the police are suggesting in this report, maybe?
Thanks, Chair. I think, again, this is a police report, and the critical element in there is within the force. So the figures reported at 12%, they're Torfaen figures within the force area. So the other 88% will be within the other authorities within the Gwent force area. So they separated this out for us as Torfaen, as they did for our colleagues in other authorities, to give them a picture, to give us all a picture of what sort of complaints they got.
Yeah, thank you. That makes it much clearer.
My question really is relating to 2.8 that says the authority receives a very low number of complaints relating to lines and signs parking. Do you think the fact that you are saying that there's a low there's a very low number of complaints, are these because the police are very stretched and are not able to pursue, and that people are not actually reporting because of that? That's the sort of conversation we were having yesterday.
I think it's more related to the nature of the complaints. As a local authority, we'll get concerns raised about parking and, for example, could you put in parking restrictions, things like that. This is more related. This information is related to the complaints about people parking on double yellow lines, and generally people up there appreciate that the police are the enforcement authority for it. So we do get some, because people think that the council are doing it, and particularly in the sort of transition period that we're heading toward now, we're getting a few more. But generally we get a low number of complaints relating to people parking on double yellow lines because people appreciate it's not a local authority function to deal with just yet.
And then in 3.4, can you clarify and set out what exactly comes under the remit of civic parking enforcement? What it actually, sort of, the nuts and bolts of it, please.
I think I'm pretty sure I put in the last committee report, certainly put in Cabinet, because it is a difficult one to appreciate where our responsibilities as Civil Parking Enforcement Authority start and end, and where the police will start and end, because they still have responsibility even when a local authority is a Civil Parking Enforcement Authority. Generally, the principle is if it's signs and lines, it'll be the local authorities, and if it's anything else, it remains with the police. So dangerous parking, obstructive parking, without traffic regulation orders will generally be the police's. There are a couple of little subtleties around it in the fact that we, with the powers that we assume we will get from Welsh Government, we will have powers to enforce things like drop curbs parking without lines, but generally signs and lines will be the local authorities, other parking offences will remain the police's.
And that includes disabled parking bays?
Yeah. Disabled parking bays will be ours, yeah, because they will be typically there's a traffic regulation order associated with those, so it's signs and lines.
Stuart, yeah.
Just noticed something on page 54, was something I have not seen before, which I'm very pleased to see, in fact, which is cycleways, and the other one was drop curbs, because that drives members, I know from Brown it's been driving people mad, that drop curbs especially, and also cycleways, which we put a lot of investment in. There's actually some considerable mileage, and cars parking on cycleways has been absolutely, and I wonder what your powers are with both of those, because we had considerable complaints about that, to my knowledge. Then the other one was what presumably if it's signed or lined is your and how much signing and lining you're going to do to enforce that, because some of the drop curbs are not signed and lined, and I just wonder where you're going to do with that, how you're going to deal with that.
So, drop curbs won't be signed and lined.
Yeah.
But we will have the authority to deal with obstruction of drop curbs without signs and lines. Other signs and lines will be what are needed to be in place to make an order legally enforceable in accordance with the regulations. In terms of parking on cycleways, I think it's more related to parking at cycleway crossing points rather than cycleways themselves. I mean, cycleways are hopefully typically relatively difficult for a vehicle to get on, but people parking at the junctions, then we can deal with that then, the cycleway and the highway.
The other one, just may I just quickly say, safe routes to school, because we've got quite a bit of that in Cwmbran as well. Cycleways.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't draw a distinction between safe routes to school, cycleways or things like that. If there's a drop curb, whatever it's been put there for, it'll be enforceable under the powers that we will have. Similarly, then we can enforce signs and lines under the powers that we will have.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to bring in clarity on the question that you had there. If the officers, when they're out and about, come across something that they're not quite sure as to whether it's our remit or the police's remit, will they be reporting those incidents to the police as well as maybe ticketing as well? Just to clarify the roles of that, because there is a grey line between the two functions. Will our officers be able to refer that directly to the police if they come across anything?
Yeah, I mean, the intention is they'll have their parking manager or the enforcement manager to be able to refer to for any clarification should they come across a particular issue. But equally, we want to maintain, and the police have told us that we will be maintaining relationships with them. So if there's any clarity to be sought on who has got what powers to do what, that's something we'll have an ongoing dialogue with the police with. Whether there'll be a sort of a direct link from an officer to the police, I'm not quite sure. That'll have to come out in the detail, but certainly we'll have that ongoing discussion with the police.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we need some clarity about this because we don't want there to be a situation of that's not my job. We want to make sure that if we are going to be tackling this as an issue within the borough, that the lines are very clear and the communication is very clear, and we don't get involved in the demarcation of who's and who's. The object of this is to actually to resolve the problem that we have within the borough, rather than sort of demark responsibility as who's to deal with it. So if we can have some clarity on that, please.
Certainly, I appreciate the point, but our powers will be limited. So there'll be things we can do, and there will be things we can't do. If issues arise which we can't deal with, then we will have to talk to the police about them. Obstructive parking with no traffic regulation order, for example, will remain a police matter. But we'll have to have those discussions with them. We couldn't then do something on the say-so of the police. Our officers wouldn't have that authority.
Councillor Thomas, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Page 27, 3.7. Income from penalty charge, fixed penalty notice, will be utilised to offset service costs. To me, it shows no ambition to go ahead and make profits that can be reinvested. Are there plans to go further once the system has been implemented?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So basically, the income and the penalty charge and the fixed penalty notice will be utilised in the report to offset the service costs. Yeah. So, to me, like I said, this shows no ambition to go any further with the profits for it to be reinvested into other areas, such as roads, stuff like that, okay? So are there plans in the future, once this system has been implemented, for the profits to go elsewhere into the borough for improvements and such like?
Yeah, I mean, the modelling's been done to date, including the modelling we bought on the original pure CP proposal. Didn't show any money being made, subject to the fact that it could be brought back to a bought-even position based on the number of tickets that were likely to be issued and paid and all those sorts of things against the costs of providing the service. The legislation or the guidance is pretty clear highways that it shouldn't be about money making. It should be about, you know, ensuring proper use of the network, things like that. But that is just modelling at the moment. If we get a greater income than we have modelled, then yeah, that will be reinvested back into the service area. And for civil parking enforcement income, then that has to be spent within the service area. It's subject to restriction. It can't be spent on general council functions. It is ring-fenced back into the highways and transportation area.
So that's kind of what I said. The money that's being made to be reinvested back into roads. So it's not, as some people would see, the cash going back into our pockets. I'm talking about the money made from this project reinvested into our roads. It's interesting you just said that the model that you used basically shows no profit. So who did this model? Because if it was me, I'd be making damn sure it was making some money to be reinvested in our roads.
Again, you know, if we set out with the intention of making money, I think we might not even get the powers from Welsh Government, because they wouldn't see that perhaps as an appropriate use of those powers. The modelling was done by a firm called RTA Associates, who have carried out tens of models for local authorities all the way across the country, possibly into the hundreds, I'm not quite sure. They did it for the 5 Gwent authorities based on the work they'd done previously. Within the Gwent local authorities, from what I can recall, I think Caerphilly made a slight surplus, and possibly Newport. I know that's based on the sort of the nature of their boroughs and the nature of their environments. But again, then the model is just that. It is a model, and it is conservative. We know that as well. So we could be in a better financial position than the model shows, effectively.
The next question really relates to 3.13.2. We had a conversation yesterday, the committee at pre-agenda, and we're concerned that in the very early days people are not going to be very aware of the challenge process, and part of our discussion yesterday is how are they going to be made aware of the challenge process. And initially in the early days we're sort of expecting that to be you know, very well advertised and lots of information shared. And one of the ideas that one of the members on the table had yesterday was maybe initially a little booklet that's left with the vehicle or the person that gives absolute clarity on the challenge process, because I know as far as the committee members yesterday discussions had is that we need to make sure that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's with informing them of the challenge process, so that you know that it will help towards less negative feedback.
For parking offences, the appeal process will be printed on the ticket.
Okay.
So if you get a ticket, you'll look on the back of that ticket, and that will give you the information on how you appeal. For environmental, perhaps.
There's information on the ticket by standard now where they can elect to go to Magistrates' Court if they want to. I'd have to check as to whether there's information around informal appeals. But we'll take that on board and we'll put it on the website. It'll be conveyed to them verbally. The difference between parking and environmental is that the person is there, so there'll be some verbal information passed over, and we'll certainly take on board the recommendation of a booklet as well.
And bringing that, so at the moment somebody gets a ticket for littering or dog fouling. There isn't anything printed that directs them to an informal appeal process, are you saying?
I think it's largely verbal at this point in time. Yeah.
Okay, because I think that needs addressing, and I think that maybe even with the parking enforcement, initially, I think part of the discussions we had yesterday is we'd like to see that enhanced in the early days so that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's, if that could be taken on board. I think Jess wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. Yeah, questions of what's been done so far and what we're planning to do. Because obviously, you know, these members of staff will be really valuable because they're out and about all day. So in terms of training, you know, from other sectors, so for example, you know, reporting things to our partners, social services, etc., that they might see. And also around, got a question later about engaging people to sort of change hearts and minds in terms of littering, etc. So I was just wondering, what scope will there be for these workers to get involved with projects, like I said, with partners, to kind of, you know, one, boost their profile, and two, sort of, you know, work towards that aim where, you know, people understand why it's unacceptable to do these things rather than just, we're just punishing them. You know.
Punitive,
Yeah.
Stuart?
Yeah. So I'll do that. I totally agree with what Jess is saying there, but where we get people who are fined because they're in a position on either the dog fouling or the littering, not the motorist thing, potential to have some, for people that are vulnerable in one way or other. We have had it in the past with the previous operators of this system, some system whereby we get a Mackenzie friend for people that are vulnerable, because we like to have people might have mental health issues, autism, elderly people or something, where we have some system, what you obviously sound like you had a discussion yesterday, some sort of Mackenzie friend or something similar in place, so where we can, rather than them get somebody find them and get very upset about it, at least have some system whereby we can help them, because look at the previous problems we've had with old ladies and people with similar, you know, health issues. It does seem that something there in place where that form of representation could help with certainly with people with those sort of issues. I'm thinking of some particular cases we've had where if it was handled that way, where CAB or somebody like that could help them, or some disability charities, it means you know, they might have done it, but at least they can help them through it. I don't know what your view is on that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'd point members to the measures of success in 3.19, where it's not all about serving the tickets. You'll see we've got patrols for verbal advice, warnings given, and there's even stuff in there about number and type of promotional campaigns, and this is where having an in-house service, the authority can direct them accordingly. As it stands at the moment, where there are people who have capacity issues, if they're mentally impaired, etc., they're either given a verbal warning by the Kingdom officer, or alternatively, if they do still receive a ticket and there is an appeal and it does relate to disability issues, then there's been many instances where the ticket has been rescinded. But we'll certainly take on board any further recommendations that members have.
Councillor Evans.
Yes. The question I got is no numbering anyway, but no numbers for you. What areas will enforcement cover? Will it include private land and Branhaven land?
I was going to say, parking will be restricted to highway and our off-street car parks if they've got an order in them. Adopted highway. Okay. Yeah.
On the environmental enforcement side, as we mentioned earlier, in the report, Safer Scrutiny has been very engaged with this over the last year or two, and certainly has expressed some concern about issuing on private land, and as a result, officers are instructed not to issue on private land at this point in time, if that's what the authority wants, and if that's what members continue to want, then that will be the instruction to officers.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the next question is on page 29 of the report. It's 3.16. Basically, the question is, does this include staffing costs? And if so, how will these be covered, as it will take time for the fines to come through to cover the officers' wages?
And then I'm sure Joe will help me if I get stuck. All right, so 3.16 refers to the set-up costs. So that's the lineage and signage, and that's the bits of equipment and the bits and bobs that we need to set the service up. So there's an investment there. I think there's some... Sorry? Yeah, one-off in investment at the start, and that's further detailed in Appendix 4. So, and it goes back to the question you raised earlier, Councillor, which was about a surplus. If members look at the table, I think there's an important point to make here, is that there's only a very small budget for this at this point in time, and that budget is outlined and it's £57,000. And so if you look about two-thirds of the way down the table with all the options and the budget issues, there's a budget there of £57,000. The remainder of it is going to have to be sourced from other places. So in effect, it's a growth item. So we've got a long way to go. And that in effect, if you look at the bottom line, it starts with 160,000 on the table. That's the growth item for the service. And that's when you've got the staffing costs, net the income. And that's the additional burden for the local authority. This is an additional sum. And obviously, that's why we've done a smaller option under option 2, which starts off in year 1 at £109,000. Okay, so it is a growth item for the authority. So then, that's why we have some discussion under 4.5, which actually indicates where that budget is going to come from for the time being. Okay, so we talk about in there that if we go for option 1, two options indicated above revenue budget need is estimated at 134 to 160 per annum for option 1, or 88 to 109 per annum for option 2. And for 1920, the growth in budget requirement will be sourced from departmental vacancy levels, vacancies in other areas, and from 2022 will be incorporated into the budget pressures. Okay, so the point of this is for members to understand that as it stands at the moment, it's a growth item for the authority, and if once members choose which one to go for, we'll say that we'll get it running, we'll invest on the one-off costs, and the staffing costs will be offset by the income that we get. Okay, so we have a long way to go to get into a surplus before we can start reinvesting in roads and stuff like that. Do you want to add anything, Joe?
Do you want to ask any more questions on the detail of that for me to, or shall I? So what we've currently got at the moment is we've got £15,000, which members approved just about 3 years ago with the Greening and Cleaning investment. So that £15,000 is basically paying for the Kingdom private enforcement for environmental items. And then the CPE, as you'll remember from the Cabinet report last June, that said it was going to cost somewhere between 20 and just up to about £50,000 in the early years. So we've put budget provision in 1920 of 42,000. So that's the 57,000 that we've already got. But obviously any changes in the fines that we've got modelled, or the numbers of fines that we get in, will actually either have a positive or negative effect on the bottom line. So effectively, at the moment, either model is going to cost either 109,000 or 160,000 more in the first year, aside from the additional one-off investment that the Council already approved under Civil Parking Enforcement Cabinet report to fund from General Fund reserves.
Staying on 3.316, you list consultants. It wouldn't be a surprise that I'm asking this question. What was the cost of using the consultants, and why couldn't it be carried out in-house? And where in the report is it the cost listed? Because I know that there's an awful lot in Appendix 4, but that's what we've had, and my eyesight is not brilliant, but it's not that good either. And that's no criticism. It is what it is. But the use of consultants, we've had quite a lot of concern yesterday about that, and we'd like some more information.
Just before Joe comes in on that, Chair, I think that there may have been some printing issues, if you printed it off, with the tables being landscape and portrait on the appendices. And I had it as well this morning. I think I referred to it, so that's why I've got my laptop on at the moment.
Chair, just before the officers answer that question, do you want to tie my question in with yours? Because they're pretty close, isn't it, really? If you tie my next question in with so if you want to just ask my next one.
And part of that really is why didn't we work with the police rather than consultants as the discussion? Yeah, I mean, they were the ones that were previously undertaking the work, and so are the experts on civil parking, and why didn't we sort of look to use them instead of an outside consultant? And that was raised yesterday and it was, it's very concerning for us.
Shall I split that into two bits then, Chair? If I split that into the actual costs, and if I let then my traffic experts come in with the reasons behind the specific expertise. So initially then, we used RTA Associates, as we said. The cost for building the model itself was £6,000. So we used them, as we said, because Welsh Government, they actually set up the system for Welsh Government, and they've worked with a number of Wales authorities as well as English authorities. And they came up with this business case here, which you may well remember from the Cabinet report last June. Very, very detailed around all of our roads, all of our signs, lineage, and all of those things. And that cost £6,000. The expertise that the guy brought to that, the expert in there brought to that, was that he already had the financial model set up, and obviously all of the ability to look at all the frequencies depending on the size and sort of spacing of the road network. So he was able to look at the sort of concentrations of the towns and different things and come up with the numbers appropriate for the size of the teams and so on. So that was £6,000. We are using Capita at the moment to support us in terms of project management of the implementation. That's also looking at transferring the powers over to us as well, isn't it? They're supporting us with the transfer of the powers from Welsh Government. So there's a lot of legal paperwork that needs to be done as part of that. So we're expecting that to cost a maximum of £26,000. Capita, yeah. £26,000 maximum. But and that is just the transferring the powers from? It's the transferring of the powers, yeah, and also supporting us working with the other local authorities around the type of particular kit, software, and all of those like individual items that are very specific to this kind of service, that is different to the type of software that we use currently in Torfaen. So they're assisting us with the coordination of that as well. So that's based on them helping us for 15 hours a week, but they haven't been helping us for as much as 15 hours a week. So we don't expect to be paying £26,000, but that is the maximum amount we will have to pay them for the support they're providing us. But it is time charged, so if they're not working on it, they're not charging us. So it's directly linked to the amount of time that they put into it.
Chair, can I just come and say, the Capita costs were listed, and they're on the appendix 4.1 of your pack. Yeah. And I appreciate there may have been printing issues there, but they are in the centre table. They are, the information is there.
And Capita are also supporting us with a review of our traffic regulation orders, and that's basically checking all of our signage and lines to make sure that they're properly marked and that everything corresponds with the traffic orders that we have in place, to make sure that everything's enforceable. That's listed in the one-off set-up costs, and that's £36,000.
What was that to, sorry?
That's to Capita as well.
In addition? In addition to the 26?
Yes.
36 for checking our signs and lines.
Checking our traffic regulation orders, which includes the signs and lines. And I'll just hand over to my traffic colleagues now on the detail behind that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we would like to have done this work in-house. I think a couple of points mentioned then is specialism and resources. And that's the difficulty of us being able to do these works in-house. The signs and lines Joe was talking about then, and I'll defer to Craig Bromley's come in. That means someone going out across the authority, looking at all the signs and lines that we have on the ground, marking up defects that they then come back to us with, so we can look to correct those defects. Now that's a piece of work that has to be done for the application. So it's also time bound as well. And after the Cabinet report last June, we thought we were going for implementation in December. We simply didn't have the resources available in terms of staff to be able to carry out those works. Capita is a framework contractor of ours, so we occasionally use them for works of this nature where we either haven't got the specialism or the resource readily available. But it's not something we do as a matter of course.
Councillor Thomas.
Just staying on that 36k for a second, because with money being as tight as it is, surely it would have been a much better idea to make sure we found an officer to go and do that, rather than, as far as I can see, waste 36k on spending that out to Capita. Surely somebody in that department could have made that call and said, well, with money being as tight as it is, we can find someone who can do that. It's going to be cheaper, surely.
You know, we simply didn't have the resource available. There's been more than happy to, in terms of what staff we have available at the particular times, and difficulties we've had with recruiting over the last year, 2 years as well, where people have moved on and moved around within the department. You know, I appreciate £36,000 sounds like a lot, but in terms of time that would buy you, even an in-house officer, with by the time overheads are added, it's not a huge amount of time, and that's the issue that we needed.
Can I just come in on that one as well? It's a requirement of the application that we confirm to Welsh Government that all our signs and lines are in order. So we need to make sure that that work is done competently and efficiently in terms of the process we got for CP starting. There was some previous work done back in 2012 as well, where we consolidated our traffic orders, put them into one big order, if you like. So there was some efficiency in using Capita, who assisted us with some work on that previous work as well. So, you know, they had the officers with the experience, and they could add the previous work that we'd done. So there was some efficiency and consistency there in the sort of work stream. But, you know, taking on point, it's just, it was a resource issue. They had a resource available, and they had the skill set to be able to do that as well. But it's a big requirement that we have to make the application to Welsh Government.
I think just to add in terms of, particularly in the traffic management section, recently we have had resource issues. We've asked around other local authorities whether we can employ or borrow some of their staff, and there simply isn't anyone around. People are asking us the same questions, so it is very difficult to get that resource as well.
Didn't we recently make one of our road inspectors redundant? Am I getting that wrong? No. Okay. Okay. On to question number 12, Councillor Tew.
Who will be responsible for training the new officers? And will the police or other enforcement professionals be asked to be involved in their training?
Yeah, for the CP side of things, we'll be getting some training providers to train the officers up to a certain level. Obviously, with experience of that type of role and the legislation that they'll be enforcing as well. We're looking to group that together to get some efficiencies with some of the other authorities who are on the same time frame as us as well. Obviously, Caerphilly are in front of us and a couple of other authorities, but the ones that were later on in June, we're looking to run a training course together. So there's, you know, efficiencies in the cost and consistency as well in the training that is provided.
How much will that cost? The training?
I can answer that.
Officer?
I can answer that. I've got the spreadsheet on.
Okay, well done.
Again, it's Appendix 4.1. It's the top table in there. And it looks like there's a cost figure there for option 1 for 4,700 and option 2 for 2,900.
£590 per officer.
It isn't indicated who it's with yet. It's just an estimated cost.
Will that be in-house training or external?
Yes, external.
Councillor Nick Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Referring now to paragraph 3.19, there's a list of measures there for success. I just want to know how often these performance indicators are going to be reviewed, and when will the first review take place following implementation?
Okay. At the moment, we've put down that there would be annual regular activity reports, as in the measures of success on the first line there, really. So, obviously, there's going to be an implementation stage at the start, and we'll report accordingly as requested, if not annually.
So is that an annual or a when requested response?
I think, given the nature of the budget sensitivities, it's a growth item, and it's obviously we need income to offset the costs. Then I think it's going to need to be at least annually, if not more regularly.
Next question is Councillor Evans.
I'll go the next one after that as well. Why the option, paragraph 3.20, why the option 1 be modelled on 7 enforcement officers when you say the officer will work in pairs, and with this model checked by the police themselves, to be efficient? And do you want me to come in on my second one, which is probably relevant to this? Same paragraph. You put forward 2 models based on staff in the enforcement service. Have we explored the potential for using a number plate recognition car? That would be more efficient, capture large areas, less time, require less staffing, and less chance of officers working for pairs. Now, this happens in other authorities, so are we looking into that?
I can take the first one. I don't know about the second one. Well, the first one, it doesn't mean to say they'll always be in pairs. It's just that from time to time, officers will need to work in pairs. So, yes, it's modelled on 7 enforcement officers, but it could be that there's a target area that 2 of them need to go to, and they'll work in pairs while the others go out and work individually. Or it could be that 2 pairs go out, 4, and then 3 go and work individually in other areas. It all depends on the risks involved, really. If it's a high-risk area where there's the potential for confrontation, then for health and safety reasons, the officers will go out in pairs. So, just because it's an odd number doesn't mean to say it isn't possible, etc. I'm sure if it's possible, the manager may go out and support, become part of a pair as well from time to time, if required. The second part, which was I think the answer is just no, we haven't explored the potential for that, really, isn't it, really? Yeah. Steve?
We're utilising models that others have utilised. There's been some discussion around the table about interpersonal skills and engaging with people and things like that. You can't do that with an enforcement car. That's not to say that we haven't looked at an enforcement car, and within the policy that's been drafted, we have left it open that should we want to enforce in that way, then the policy allows for it. But that will be further down the road, no pun intended, apologies.
The thing is, with a car, it'll reduce costs, and the staff are better utilised probably for other issues within the ward, so there'll be more scope with less people using for parking offences by using a vehicle, and others could use it for littering and dog fouling. So I just can't see why we haven't looked at that model from the start.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, I'd just like to ask, you've given us 2 options to look at, and obviously for us to consider both. I just want to ask you a quick question about option 2, 4 enforcement officers. This is potentially a service that's going to be running 365 days a year. Is 4 enforcement officers, obviously 24 hours a day potentially, is 4 enforcement officers sufficient to staff that?
We gave the second option of 4 because we thought it would be a reduced cost. We talked about the costs and how it was a growth item in the main, apart from the budget we had available. We went for 7 because it was 4, because we thought that was the first option. It was adequate. So in the sense that it was based on the modelling that Highways had done around 3 civil parking officers, and the feedback we'd had from scrutiny in the past was that we needed more environmental enforcement as well. So we went for 4, the equivalent of 4 environmental enforcement and 3. When we looked at the costs of that, then obviously that's quite a challenge, and so we brought in an option of least cost, which is it's a question of judgment as to whether it's adequate. But you're absolutely right. The less officers we have, then we've got to cover for staff sickness and things like that, and they'll have holidays as well. That'll reduce the resilience and the impact of the service. But we felt it appropriate to put a lesser option at reduced cost, given the wider financial climate and the fact that that this was largely a new team, a new area of work, which would need new funding from the authority. We could have put forward a multiple of options, really. We could have put 6, 7, 8, 9, but in the end, with the work we did, with the modelling we did, we put forward one which we thought was adequate, and one which was at a cost, and one which was a smaller service at a reduced cost. But we're happy to take members' views, obviously, on whether they feel that a different size of service should be considered as well.
Yes, thank you. I mean, really what I was trying to get at there wasn't so much the cost of it. It's the reality of being able to offer some form of a service with only 4. You know, are we going to get a situation where some days and some areas just aren't covered, and people will get to know when people are working and when they're not, and they will park appropriately based on the coverage. So I just wanted your view as to whether we could actually, if we only had 4, offer an effective service or not, regardless of cost.
The smaller the service, the less effective it'll be, and we'll have the challenges around staff sickness, leave, etc. So, yeah, obviously, it won't be as effective as a larger service.
Can I just clarify that point as well? In the original model for the CPE, the number of officers was based on the length and type of restrictions that we had throughout the borough. So when they recorded sort of the linear lengths and the type of restrictions and the time it would take to enforce each of those restrictions, it came out with 3 officers. So if you look at Model 2, essentially, you wouldn't have full coverage because you'd only have 2 officers to just parking enforcement, for example, just to try and give you some context to where that.
Okay, thank you. In 4.3, under social inclusion, it has fixed penalty notices will not be issued to juveniles 17 years or younger. We were wondering if there are any alternative sanctions for the 13 to 17-year-old category.
That's a policy decision for the local authority as it stands at the moment, but there are alternatives, and one alternative is to issue them, and we can issue them to people who are under 18 if we wish to. And we actually debated this with the executive member before we actually finalised the report. So once the age, you know, we can issue fixed penalty notices to juveniles, and that can be a choice. We could also give them warnings, a verbal warning, if you like, and perhaps if we had a problem around schools and certain areas as well, that's where some more promotional work could go into the school, and perhaps the team could.
Because there are problems around schools, there are problems around in parks where they congregate, and I think that's going to form part of our discussion, I think, afterwards. Councillor Thomas.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, Dave. You said you've already had a chat with the exec member about that. What was the exec member's views on it?
I think it was really a question. The current policy we operate to was the fixed penalty notices, and we've made a decision not to issue them to people under the age of 18 years old. The discussion was, do we want to change that now, or do we want to continue with that policy for the time being and perhaps review it again in the future? and as this service is still, you know, what we're talking about is a much bigger presence in the area, and it was felt that we wanted to continue with the policy as it is at the moment. But there are options to give warnings, of course, which we can still do, but there are options to give fixed penalty notices to juveniles as well, and there's government guidance around that, and that's perhaps something that we could review in the future in this forum as well.
So the exec member didn't want the issue between the ages of 13 and 17 then, or?
Not at this time, no. It was something we could consider in the future.
Faye, I think you were next. Thank you. Sorry. Under 4.6, we're saying about how we're going to take on these members of staff and they're going to be introduced to councillors. We just wondered, how will we communicate these changes to residents, and how can members help in getting the message out to residents?
Yeah, we recognise, and actually it's within the guidance, that you know, good communication of a scheme of this nature from civil parking enforcement now, but it'll apply equally. It's necessary and wanted, and you know, good engagement is worthwhile. And I think it was something this committee brought up when we first presented CP. Probably next week we'll be in touch with our comms colleagues. We'll be getting a comms plan put together, which will detail out how we're going to engage with our residents, with our members. You know, we've talked previously members seminars, where that'll give members the information they can pass on to their constituents, and then we'll use our typical you know, communication methods of social media, of all the other things that we typically use. But happy for the committee then to take recommendations on how they could see effective engagement to advise people advise our residents of these changes. I mean, effectively, it's a change in who provides the service. People shouldn't be parking in contravention of traffic regulation orders only. Traffic regulation orders, but there is a change, and you know, there could very well be a change in the level of enforcement given the police's resource issues compared to what we may have available for us to enforce. That's possibly the
Yeah. I'll just come back on that and ask, will you sort of be giving out a leaflet at all, and would you work with other authorities on perhaps advertising, you know, the best way to park and why it's a problem and things?
Yes, is the answer. I mean, we refer to RCT throughout this report, or throughout reports and discussions. RCT had a very comprehensive comms plan when they put their, when they took over their powers, when they took over civil parking enforcement, and that's something we'd look to replicate and learn from. There's all sorts of things you can do to ensure that residents are available, are aware, and we'd look to make sure that you know, we use best practices as widely as we could.
Councillor Tim.
I live up in Aberystwyth, and I go to St Luke's Road, Snatchwood Road, every day. Everybody parks on the pavement. It's an A road. The traffic won't pass each other if they don't park on the pavement. What are you going to do about these people? Are they going to be booked for parking outside their homes where they've parked there for like 30 years?
Yeah, I couldn't give you the answer to individuals at the moment, but certainly across the county borough there's areas where people will have parked in contravention of orders, and not parking there will give them some difficulty because the available parking will be some way away. I think we'd need to look at them, but also we'd need to be have due regard to the issues that are there. We have to be sympathetic to things of that nature. I think the difficulty is there's a traffic regulation order there, they're parking in contravention, so we'd need to take that into account when we looked at what action we could or should take.
We don't want the parking officers going up there and just booking the whole street the first week they're working. Like, it's going to be a nightmare.
Councillor Powell.
Two quick questions. First was following on from Councillor Thomas's point. Like, I wouldn't want to see teenagers booked for fines because obviously who's going to pay that? Parents. But what are we doing? Obviously we've got in-house, we've got youth service, play service. Yeah. You know, these officers will be picking up hotspots. but also obviously external agencies. There's plenty of charities, etc., that, you know, churches, whatever, you know, that we can target to these areas to work with teenagers, you know, etc., parks. Second question was around, obviously, talking about lack of parking. Most people know it's my pet project to grass creep the entire borough. But are we looking at working with other agencies such as community councils, etc., to try and increase the parking that we do have available? That's it.
I only wanted to add, that was all. Yeah, I only wanted to say that Councillor Chew's remark about parking on streets, it's half a Cwmbran. And you bring it up with the police. Everybody's parking half on and half on the road, and it's a classic obstruction case. And they're supposed to leave enough room for wheelchairs and prams, and they don't. And you walk every street, Pontnewid, Llantarnam, everywhere, and you could do the whole lot very, very easily in one foul swoop.
No message around the Llantarnam.
Pardon? Not you, no, you're on the Cape, but everywhere around the place other than Llantarnam. And I just wonder what they would do, because it is totally in contravention. I mean, you can hardly put people, and I just don't know what the answer is to that one. And when you talk to the police about it, they just have this rule of thumb where they don't book any of them. And the other one I was going to bring in, because it's a bet noir mine, is bus stops. I absolutely get driven mad with Pontnewid Village and anywhere else. That little thing in Pontnewid Village, you can do on Cwmbran a lot as well. And everybody parks in bus stops. That lot I would like to see done.
I think if I take them kind of in reverse order, I think bus stops, typically the bus stops will have a traffic regulation order on them. And that is one of the reasons that's cited within the legislation, the guidance, is to ensure public transport can satisfactorily use the network. So, you know, bus stops we'd expect to see enforced. Parking in areas half on, half off the footway. If there's no traffic regulation order on those streets, which there won't be typically in a lot of residential areas, then that will still fall to a police issue. Parking provision, I mean, we appreciate that parking provision is lacking across the borough, from the traditional infrastructure in Blaenavon, for example, in the historic Blaenavon, even to the new town of Cwmbran. There isn't enough parking for the cars that are available now. We have got a policy to provide parking in certain areas, which was debated by, I can't remember the name of the group, but a number of years ago, a member group. Unfortunately, there's no funding attached to that work. And I think the first question was probably more related to environmental enforcement, which was about... sorry, Councillor Powell, the first question was about youngsters being targeted, being informed.
Yeah, getting sort of youth engagement in. And also on your point, with the, with the grass creating, etc. But is there, we can't give them money, but is there scope for us to offer support to groups that could raise the money to get systems in, or car parks in, etc. Neighbourhood groups and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's... in terms of what members of this council are trying to do in terms of community engagement, community building, resilience and such like, certainly that'd be something that we as officers would be open to if funding came available from other areas to provide a worthwhile scheme. We'd certainly look to get engaged. Sorry, just on the first point then, within the waste section, for example, we do go into schools and teach children about recycling primarily. But equally, things like littering will be picked up as part of those, so there might be other opportunities from other areas as well.
Councillor Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to stay on about how we were going to get the message out. I don't know whether you've been seeing what Caerphilly Council are doing lately with the stickers that they're putting on the cars before they take over the powers, and it just basically is a sticker that says this vehicle is illegally parked. The police are currently able to issue a vehicle with fixed penalty notice. However, please be aware, from Monday the 8th of April 2019, Caerphilly County Borough Council will take over parking enforcement from Gwent Police, and civil enforcement officers will have new powers to fine motorists. I think that's a really good idea that they're doing that. But just whilst it was mentioned about the 13 to 17-year-olds being fined, obviously I am the boogeyman. I would like to see children's fined on that, because if my kid came home with a fine saying he dropped litter, that child would never be dropping litter ever again. So I just wanted to add that little bit in as well.
Thank you. My question relates to Appendix 2, 6.4. It says in there, as a general rule, prior to the issue of a PCN, CEOs will allow a brief period of time to elapse between first observing a vehicle unlawfully parked and subsequently issuing a PCN. I think we wanted to know and to drill down, what do you mean by a brief period of time? Because in part of the training of these officers, we were concerned yesterday that maybe one would give 30 seconds, another would give 10 minutes. Continuity would be important. Reputational damage to the council needs to be considered, and we wanted more information on what that brief period of time means.
Yeah, it relates to some of the restrictions, and generally it was around a 5-minute period. So it was just to give them an opportunity to observe the offence or offences being taken before they just physically go down the road, arrive straight away and issue the tickets.
So will that form part of their training,
Yes.
a set amount of time?
Yes.
Because I think there needs to be continuity there, and it can't be a vague, give people a few, a brief time is not, it needs to be nailed down a bit.
The guidance does suggest some times, and it does differ with certain highway users as well. For example, people displaying a disability badge. So I'll give you some more clarity on those sort of observation times if you want.
Please.
It's 26.5 again, around that area. What happens in an incident where somebody removes a ticket, removes a ticket and rips it up and throws it away? So are we gonna have them for the parking, and we can have them for litter at the same time?
From the CE point of view, they don't necessarily have to issue the ticket. If they've taken a photograph and they've got evidence by way of that, they can post a ticket out by that means. Not quite sure about how that goes on to the littering element of it, if they do actually throw the ticket on the floor. Or
I think one of the main differences with civil parking is that when an offence is witnessed and the ticket is issued and it is fixed to the car, although as Craig said it can be posted out afterwards, usually the driver's not there, so it'll be affixed to the vehicle. But if the driver was to come back whilst the officer was there and say, "Oh, I'm not paying this," and they'd have a bit of an altercation and then rip it up in front of him and chuck it on the floor, and so the enforcement officer witnessed the littering offence, then I would see no reason why not, that they couldn't get the tickets. Don't forget, offences have got to be witnessed. Hittering's got to be witnessed. You've got to watch the person and watch them do it, whereas parking, the vehicle's there and it's on a line, but the keeper may be nowhere to be seen for that period. So it is a slightly different way. But yes, if we witness it, I don't see any reason why not.
And that sort of leads us on to our next question about vehicles on lines. On page 54, there was just a query really on the fact that the wheels of the vehicle are parked outside of the markings of the parking bay space means that other parts of the vehicle may be encroaching. Can you clarify wheels outside of parking bay? Is it on the line is an offence? How much over the line? Is it the entire wheel over the line? I think more clarity really for it. On page 54 of appendix 64. Page 54.
You see the contravention code on the left-hand column?
24. Sorry. Fourth line down, parked outside of the markings of the parking bay.
But
Absolutely.
I'd see that as the officer observing that vehicle, his wheel not being in contact with the line and outside of it. That's how I would interpret that. So if his wheel is sort of within the limits of the marking and not outside of it, then they would issue a ticket. But it would be down to the officer to make that judgment, interpretation of that particular contravention. So, you know,
I sort of disagree there. I think that if we are employing teams, we need to be clear on what, because one officer could say you've got 2 inches of wheel hanging over the white line, another could say, you know, it needs to be the entire wheel over the white line, another could say you're touching the white line and need to be within the lines, within the space of those white lines. So I think if we are going to we're clearly doing this, but we need to make sure that our officers have absolute clarity and definition on what that is. Because if we are going to have 4 to 7 officers out there, all having the ability to be able to make a judgment on what that is, there could be 7 different determinations. We need to set that bar and we need to have absolute continuity there.
Chair, yeah, you raised a good point there, Chair. I mean, there's a consistency. You cite that as an example,
yeah.
But there's a consistency element that we'd seek to gain across the team working within the borough, and that's something that would come through in the training in terms of applying consistency and making sure people get the same message to look at the same sort of contravention to then make it an offence.
Because that, you know, that terminology is too vague. It needs to be an absolute direction. These officers are going to have a hard enough job facing members of the public as it is, without there being appeals and challenges to that, because Mrs. Smith down the road didn't have a ticket for parking on the white line, but Mr. Jones has had. And I think we are going to make their job so much harder if we give them the freedom to determine that. It needs to be absolutely, yeah.
We've got to be careful, because the modern vehicle now is a lot wider than the original parking spots. And when the lines were built, they were built for a smaller vehicle, and the vehicles are a lot larger now, so if we don't get it right, there's going to be a lot of confrontation, I think.
Councillor Evans, you're the next question.
This is the one I'm questioning. Will the use of blue badges be inspected and enforced?
Yes, is the answer to that. Exactly the same as the case is now. You know, obviously, car parks are on street as well.
The reason I ask that, because sometimes the people who are driving these vehicles are not the people who are there with the blue badges, and that's my concern.
They'll just be there to observe the badges on display in the vehicle. They won't be checking who that badge was issued to. That's a matter for people who operate the actual scheme, and you know, give the actual disabled badges out to those people who are deemed eligible.
Councillor Jones, can I? They've got a picture on those, so they will know who's in the vehicle, because the picture of the person, whether they're driving or whether they're being driven, will be on the blue badge, I believe.
I think the case is that, as was mentioned earlier, the driver isn't necessarily there. So if someone sees a vehicle with what appears to be a valid blue badge, the enforcement officer would have to wait till that person returned to the vehicle to cross-reference, and that could be hours. So I mean that wouldn't particularly be practical. So as long as the blue badge is there, I think the officer would have to make the call that it's parked in accordance with what appears to be a blue badge. even if that blue badge is getting misused by the owner of it or whoever is using it.
Hopefully there'll be the availability for our officers to forward on any potential concerns that they see, though I would hope as far as if they see that the picture that's on the blue badge isn't the person driving or being driven by, isn't present in the vehicle, I'm assuming the officers will be able to signpost on. I think one of the questions that I had is, have any other authorities implemented a joint in-house service? And have we learnt any lessons from those that we have? Have we approached them, etc.?
We're not aware of anyone who provides a joint in-house service at the moment. Yeah, we are. For these sorts of offences, the guidance for civil parking is fairly clear. That it can happen, it's not precluded or anything, but we're just not aware of anyone who does operate that at the moment. We have whispers from across the Gwent area that others are looking at it, but again, they're not live schemes as yet, because across the Gwent area, these schemes are still coming in.
So all the more reason for us to make sure that we get it absolutely right, because we are going to be setting the bar, and others will be looking to us for our expertise in it. So it's even more important, as far as I'm concerned, that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's here. Councillor Jones. One last question, and that is a general question. Just what are we doing at the moment, re-engaging the change in people's mindset to stop littering, dog fouling, things like this?
Dave can come in terms of enforcement, but there's a significant amount of work going on across the council, particularly at the moment in terms of the spring clean. There's a massive amount of activity taking place from our officers carrying out their functions, but obviously highlighting, I think there was a feed today about how much litter we'd collected off the 442 and the 472. There's a huge amount of volunteer activity going on at the moment. There's volunteer litter picks scheduled for the next few weeks. We're engaging with Keep Wales Tidy. The council, in terms of trying to embed its clean and green priority, is carrying out a lot of work as directed by members. And we hope for that mindset to change. That some people think it's acceptable to throw litter out of a vehicle. I personally don't, and I'm sure others won't as well. But that's the battle, the activity, the work that we're looking to do as part of the softer side in terms of engagement, empowering, changing behaviours, like you say.
You said you go into schools. Is that sort of thing also looked at within the school environment? Because that would be useful, because we know a lot of 13 to 17-year-olds and younger do litter, and, if they've got a dog in the house, it would be good for them to do some work around that sort of thing. Help their parents.
Yeah, I speak personally for the primary school my child goes to. I'm chair of governors there, and we've got an eco committee, and the children hold that committee, and they present to the governing body then every sort of quarter what they've been doing. And I know in particular one of my waste colleagues has been in as part of their normal waste programme. They spent a lot of time showing the children about the different types of recycling, where they end up, how they can be reused, which receptacles to use. So the children, well, I get told, obviously I'm well aware anyway, but the children come home then and obviously embed that. That's happening a lot in primary schools. Perhaps less so in secondary, because I've also got a son in secondary, but the actual growth then from that younger child with embedded that right through. Certainly I've seen a difference. I can't speak for all of the schools, but I think a lot of the schools I know of have got those eco committee situations where the children have that ownership. It's an extension of the school council type thing.
Good news then, thank you. Councillor Tew.
I was driving back from Edinburgh last week, and there's some big signs on the side of the roads. Don't throw. Yeah. Litter. Fantastic. Come Avon Road could do with them big time. The dual carriages we could do with them big.
Councillor Powell.
Yeah, just following on from the schools thing, obviously I've been into a lot of schools. Primary schools are doing very well with it. Obviously our problem is, secondary level. Just pointing out that the new youth council is going to be set up at the moment, so they'll be setting sort of their own borough-wide plan as well, and I really think any engagement we could do with that to encourage that sort of activity happening in schools and outside schools would be great. But also just a quick thing, talking about engagement and littering, etc. I always say this, but we could do with having some figures that we can just spout easily, saying, every time you drop X costs us, and then what that's equivalent to in another service area, just so that we, those headline things like charities do, when you donate so much money, but, it's kind of something people can get their minds around, because saying, we collected lots of tons of litter, which is amazing, but it's still like massive numbers for people to sort of get their head around and understand.
Dropping a crisp packet costs you, the taxpayer, X amount of money to have cleared up. And I think, I agree, I think that if there was some sort of targeted communication along those lines where it actually is allowing people to see that it's physically costing them as taxpayers, then it might change some minds. And that is a really good idea. Councillor.
All the things you told me hang fire on. Yeah, right. No, I'm quite happy to. One was what I didn't hear, maybe I missed it, but one was the data recording and software equipment you were using for these teams. I hadn't picked that up. And the hardware they were using, equipment, obviously we have to use mobile phones, computers, etc. I couldn't see it, maybe I missed it, but that presumably has a cost, and that would be quite considerable, like kit and the cameras and the rest of it. I presume it's in there somewhere. That was one aspect of it. You did mention somewhere about the apps or something they were using. I did hear that bit. Then the other aspect was, which sort of follows on from what we were saying about data, picking data up, because we were presented with not having some data, and it struck me there was a heck of a lot of data this was going to generate. Some was data protection, but there was general data. The stuff we got from the police was not very good or not very detailed. So if we ran this for 3 or 4 years, we were going to pick a heck of a lot of stuff up that would give us a lot of evidence about all the cars, etc. And I mean, those of us at community councils get the police down there asking us this stuff, which is stuff that really annoys a lot of councillors and public. It seems that if we can use the evidence gathered from this, there's a lot of stuff here, and litter and dog. It's the sort of stuff that everybody's interested in. So and also it has what we're suggesting, education purposes. There's a lot of data here, really, really useful. So and the other aspect of this, which you've heard me mention before, are we recording all of this electronically rather than going to the infamous books? Because it seems if we're doing it across counties, it's something that obviously, does it have a data recording system that's electronic, and are you doing it on a all Wales or area basis? There's 3 things there. I'm interested to hear what you say about that.
I think in terms of the recording of offences for civil parking enforcement, actually for environmental, it'll be electronically recorded, so it will be on devices. Some form of smartphone is what is seen as with an app on. That will obviously generate data then. How that data can then be interrogated to find hotspots or whatever, I'm not quite sure of. I don't know whether you know the intricacies of the system as yet.
There is some reporting mechanism built into the Imperial system that we'll be using, so I dare say we extract some data out of that that you've collected.
So it would highlight areas where there's continuous offences, or particular areas where there was unusual sort of offences, or would seem unusual. So that should be available to us, given the fact that it's all going to be electronically based. In terms of areas, our area will connect with RCT, and that will be electronic to generate the penalty charge notices for. The notices will be generated in terms of the back office function, it'll be transferred electronically to RCT.
Is this all going to be under SRS, by the way? That's the other one I was going to ask you.
Probably a bit of both, is it?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Obviously, there's with the use of smartphones and some of the apps that we're using, there'll be security issues and stuff that need to go through SRS for us to be able to link to RCT system. But we are working our way through that at the moment. Yeah.
Is that all covered in the budget, or is that a separate budget?
We've got the one-off capital budget, the 160,000 we talked about, that's the set-up cost, so partly the sign-in and line-in check-in, the remedial works on any changes to the sign-in and line-in, but also in the Appendix 4 is the software, purchase of the devices, links to the infrastructure. So we've got body cams, uniform stab vests, etc., phones with the apps, printers, and 2 licenses, because what we've got is the RCT will look after the, we use Imperial software to look after the CPE side of it, but the environment side, it's not capable of doing both, so we have to have 2 separate apps, which would mean 2 separate sets of licenses. So we've got that sort of factored in as well, because the back office for the environment will sit with our existing software.
That's the other question.
Yeah, that sits with our existing. We've got an existing system, Civica-based system, which links to our financial systems as well. So we've got that side of it, but there's 2 separate streams for that information to come through, if you like, because of the two very different natures of the types of tickets that are being issued. But the costs are all captured within this appendix here on Appendix 4.
Good. That's answered the question quite neatly. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jones.
I suppose sort of going back over a few points, because we saved it till the end, I was just looking at the capita issue again, and just wondering, you said there weren't any officers that could do the work within one of the other local authorities, but would it have cost more than the 36,000 or less than 36,000 if there had been an officer available from one of the other authorities that we could have taken on? I would imagine it would have been about that, but perhaps a bit less.
We have, we've got experience of that. We had a design engineer from Blaen y Gwent working out at T-Blaen for quite some time, because we had the need and we had the schemes and the funding available to support that officer. And Blaen y Gwent didn't have that particular workload at that time. So in terms of actual costs, it's quite variable, because it would depend on the level of officer you were seeking to get yourself. For this, if we looked at that 36k, you're looking at someone who's able to understand the regulations, understand the directions, so when they go out and they see a particular issue with a marking, they'll be able to understand whether it's of consequence or not. And also someone then can run some systems to enable park maps, for example, to be able to generate the right orders and such like. A direct comparison probably isn't available, but it wouldn't have been significantly less. Employing capita, we employ them per hour, so it's all those things about if we employed our own, we've got our overheads. Those people would have leave. If they went off sick, we would have those issues with them, and it comes down to skills, resource, and time again.
Pension. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'll just add to that as well, that with the capita cost, there's obviously several officers working at the same time, not just one officer. So there's a number of officers going out doing the site surveys, then bringing that information in, and other officers then inputting that, interpreting that, and then put it into the park map system that they do it. So, again, it's not, can't easily make a direct comparison, because it's just not one person. You're paying for a resource and a team of people with differing skills.
Thank you.
My question really is that we are due to start this shortly, and without presuming what the committee or any of the committee's recommendations, we're looking to move towards zero tolerance. Have you got a pre-agenda of the starter date, like stickers, etc.? And how long are you going to give before zero tolerance is is brought in? Is there a plan in place?
I think that'll form part of the comms plan that we referred to earlier. Certainly, we want to be informing people, and as Councillor Thomas mentioned, then the Caerphilly thing, I saw that. I've seen it actually. Yeah, and I do quite like that. It's kind of dependent upon recruitment for us in terms of whether we can get those people recruited in time to do those sorts of activities prior to the start of July. But it will come out in the comms plan. I don't think, as an authority, members would want to see zero tolerance on day one. Members will want a lead-in period and and then a lead-in, a bit of a grace period, for want of a better description, where where there won't be perhaps zero tolerance and there'll be a little bit of sway. But we have to get a level of enforcement, so it's realistic and effective. Fairly soon after the go live date, I would suggest, for CPE.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a monetary issue then, isn't there? That if you give too long a grace period for zero tolerance, you're not taking in the money, not to win the profit, to actually just cover the service. So I think we need some joined up thinking as far as the teams that you employ go, and where they or how they're utilised in the first week or so, Sorry, Dave. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, when I spoke to the report earlier, we have built in a little bit of that grace period
For the first year.
for the civil part
For the July to March.
into the budget,
Brilliant.
into the budget modelling for it, but only for the civil parking, because that's the new thing. The environmental enforcement, unless you want it otherwise, we've got it out there, and we didn't see there was a need for a period of grace for that. Okay.
Ashley and then Councillor.
Thanks for pointing out this. I just had a quick look at it. I noticed that some of it's under capital and some of it's under revenue. In terms of, I presume you buy the licences year on year, and some of the other stuff you buy in on the capital. But, is that variable in the amount of business you do? In terms of what you buy in on the, I'm looking at the support and project management you've got under capital. Is that a steady state? And then the other stuff, the licences are year on year. I'm only asking, I'm not being too clever about this. I'm not.
No, you're absolutely right. So items 1 and 2 on the spreadsheet, they're the things that we'll have to buy in bulk, one-off.
Yeah.
So we talked about printers and phones and so on, laptops and so on. We've got a purchase then of the sort of first year licences, but then all of the sort of hardware that goes with the Imperial system. So that's the £12,000 we've got there. And obviously the project management is a one-off resource to help us in the transition. So those first 2 sections are one-off capital expenditure. Then the third section there is an annual budget that we'll need for ongoing replacement of equipment that's worn out, clothing that needs replacing, uniform and so on. So we also have to pay an annual cost then for the licences. So it's a smaller cost than the actual purchase cost, but there is nevertheless an annual maintenance cost. So that's what's captured in the revenue budget of about 20,000 a year in the bigger team, or about 12,000 a year in the smaller team. Okay.
Well, thank you. No.
And Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask your views with regard to the wider impact on the council. Obviously, it's a major change. What sort of impact are we expecting when the phones start ringing? When people are going to be querying it? Because the first thing they'll do is they'll ring us as a council rather than looking on the back and see where they're supposed to be ringing. So, have we looked at that as some form of an impact? And the other thing is just a quick query with regards to, is a provision being made for the cost of the people that are going to appeal, and the point at which when they actually do query it, do they get an opportunity to pay at the £35 or at the £70 rate? Where does the clock stop with regards to that? And just very, very, and I'll get all 3 in straight away. The transport system have used dash cams to try and encourage people to report offences and dangerous driving they see on roads. Have we thought about anything like that for the wider public to record and film and report instances of, of parking, and is that a facility that we've got room to bring in either now or in the future? So it's three things, so apologies for that.
If I take the first one initially, I think our colleagues in ABS who provide the support functions for the council, typically with a change like this, we engage them as part of the communications plan. So they will be aware that come July, there's potential for a lot of calls around appeals process and things like that. And then we will, with them, generate some form of script so they understand what they can tell our residents who contact us, which will be primarily pointing them to the information on the back of the ticket, but also talking them through that if necessary. I think for the second and third, if I could, the appeal bit, if you...
Yeah, the appeal bit for the CPE is a sort of standard process, if you like, appeals process. It is on Appendix C in our enforcement policy. RCT are going to be managing, obviously, that appeals process for us, and they will just contact us as and when they require some information. So at sort of an informal appeal stage, they will, for example, come to us and say someone has challenged this ticket because of lack of signage or something like that. So we either accept or refuse that challenge. And then it continues to go through the process. It's quite a convoluted process, to be honest. I wouldn't to be the expert on it at the moment, because I think you really need to be a practitioner working it every day to fully understand it. But it's laid out for in what I would suggest is a more simplified version or process in Appendix C. But RCT will essentially be managing all that for us, and will just contact us when they need information relating to, like I said, an informal challenge or confirmation of a traffic order, or if it does go to the tribunal, then we'll need representation because we're the authority that have obtained the powers.
So we have to pay for that then, do we?
Yes.
Dave, you wanted to come in?
I wanted to add to what was already been said. Yes. If I could just add to what's already been said. In addition, you are right. We've experienced this with environmental enforcement already. It's very, very new to officers, the use of civil parking signs. But with the environmental enforcement, there is always going to be a sense of outrage when people are given a ticket, and they may contact members directly, as we've experienced, or they'll contact the local authority. And in addition to the signposting that would be done by those that pick up the telephone initially, like the business support colleagues and others, one of the role of the support officer within the team, the support officer within the team, will probably, our experience has shown on the environment side, is that officer can often just deal with what's, if you like, an informal appeal. Oh, I've just had this, and that's a quick 2-minute call, these are your options. They may then go away, think about it, and decide to pay. And so that experience will build up over time, but that person's role will be pretty important, in addition to their other role, which would be managing the database and sorting out the prosecution files and providing the support to the officers and things like that. So that person will become very skilled and adept at that. And we don't have a team at the moment, but when we do set up a team, there are people around who've got experience of dealing with that, and we intend to draw those in. And we've got all the scripts and the processes that Kingdom have used as well, or our partner have used, and with all those experiences over years, we have inside information as to what they use there as well, and we can build that experience here to help to manage the demand, especially when people are upset and want to contact the council as the first point of call. Is that okay?
Do you just want me to add a little bit about how we've accounted for the money then within the model? So you mentioned the levels of fines. So with the CPE, the way we've modelled it is we expect, from the experience of the consultant who put together the business case, we would expect about 75% of people to pay their fines uncontested and to pay them early at the £35 a time. So we've modelled in that, and then we've also modelled in then a sort of a more of a drip feed where it's a smaller income coming in for that 25% of people, because in almost all the cases, unless they're going to be appealed and rescinded straight away, they will always have to pay at the higher level, at the £70 level, because when it goes through court, they'll be expected to pay at the higher level because of the time lapse, but they'll also be then expected to pay the court fee of £8 and then any legal fees on top and any bailiff fees on top. So that's where we've outlined those sort of potential. It starts off, it could be £35, but actually, if you're not able to appeal and have it rescinded and you do need to pay, you will end up then paying that sort of final figure. On the environment side, if they don't pay the fine, that's the fixed penalty notice that's issued to them, then that will then be a prosecution for the offence in court. So we will still then get court costs if they're awarded, and the victim surcharge, isn't it, through that process.
We just get the costs.
So we just get the costs come back, which is a little bit more than the fixed penalty notice in the first place. And again, we've allowed for that in the model, because obviously that takes time to happen, so that won't come through within the first few weeks, but then that will come through on a drip feed, even if the court say that the person who's committed the offence only has to pay a fixed amount a month or so on. That will come through as a drip feed as well. So you'll see that coming through as environmental court costs and CPE fines recovery over the period, and then as the periods grow, that income will build up.
There is just one final thing. The way on the civil parking side is for each fixed penalty notice served and is sent to RCT to do the back office, they pay, we pay them for £5 for each one, and that's how we cover that cost of, it's based on the number we serve, and they take for £5 of the fine to cover their costs of processing the fine.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at there, it's a cost-neutral exercise for us to actually pursue non-payment. It's not a risk to us to pursue it. We never get in a situation of it's not worth it financially for us to go through. So we can actually pursue people who have chosen not to pay. Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Tu?
There is one other part of it.
Yeah.
So just to pick up that final point, Councillor, I think where the operation is from by GoSafe isn't where you can submit dash cam footage to GoSafe and then to the police. I suppose there's two elements to that. There's one element is whether someone is a resident or whoever is highlighting an issue to us, so they just send us a photo of typically these is how cars park in this area, can you have a look? Or there's the other one where could we take legal action based on a photo provided by an individual? I don't know the answer to that. I dare say there's a few legal issues within that, including probably people having to give statements when they witness it, which they may not be prepared to do. That's certainly something we can look into with colleagues who've run civil park enforcement to see if there's mileage in that.
And Councillor Tu?
Can we get some of the officers involved in the councillors' street scene meetings?
Certainly, I think that'd be a useful forum to discuss those issues. Those meetings are there already. We pick up street scene issues and waste issues at the moment. So yeah, I think wider issues of parking again might be a good way to introduce people to the members as well via those meetings. So yeah, no issue with that.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions. Hope we haven't been too harsh on you, but thank you very much for attending and for answering our questions. And we'll now go on and formulate our recommendations.
this bit when we were talking about any offences that our enforcement officers see, that they actively report those to the police when they see them as part of their duties.
Okay, members. We are going to. I know that both Becky and I have taken some notes on the recommendations. I think we are going to just go through the scrutiny activity so that we can. They've asked us 5 different points on page 24. They've asked us 5 different points there, and so we're going to try and formulate our recommendations based on those points. So I think the first point really is the aims and objectives of the service and the proposed enforcement policy. Yeah, please.
So, thank you, Chair. So the ones I noted relevant to that one were the 2 that you raised, Councillor Haynes, on the time period being specific, so whether you want that detailed more clearly in the policy and in the training then for officers,
yes.
And also with regards to the statement on the wheel outside of parking bay. So you want greater clarity again on that in the policy and again in the training for officers.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be set in stone so that our enforcement officers are all working off the same page. Councillor Tom.
Thanks, Chair. So does that include an exact date of when we're going to start zero tolerance? Because we need an exact date on that, yeah.
Councillor Jones?
Could we ask for a copy of the comms, what the comms have put together as far as advertising this new way of working and getting the information out to the public? As soon as they've got that, could we ask for a copy of it?
Pick that up under number 5, yeah, we'll pick that up as it, yeah, Councillor.
I got concerned with the 2 parts of the scrutiny activity.
Yeah.
The one is for the NLC, the size and the scope of the options presented, and the model cost of the service options. Because...
Should we take those one by one?
Yeah, the reason I say about that is because when I mentioned about the number plate recognition system, I don't think they've looked at it.
You want that as a recommendation, that they look at the potential for that? Yeah.
Can't make a decision.
I think what I think really is that they've given us 2 options, and we are. I think what I've heard around the table, the majority of us want them to consider a 3rd option, which includes that vehicle monitoring, and that we're disappointed that there hasn't been scoped as a 3rd option, and that maybe. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that we want a 3rd option?
Can I just point out at this point, they have put 2 options forward to you. I'm just mindful that they want to take your recommendations to Cabinet in April so that this is implemented, because they have to obviously go out to advert and employ these officers. I am conscious, I know you want that as a proposal, and they did say that the policy is left open to that as a potential. So I'm minded to advise you that you need to put forward your proposed option out of those 2 and then add on a recommendation that then going forward they look at that, maybe?
Really base your decision, because if they do that with getting that vehicle, that could alter the way you look at the employment. Yeah.
Precedent. Exactly what Becky said. I wouldn't want to see a 3rd option as such. I'd want them to go away, because as we build in year-on-year costs, and there'll be scope then for them to develop something else. But in terms of the initial rollout, I'd rather see people on the streets than a car option, even though it might be slightly cheaper, because you've got that element of, people visibility, which is, the problem we have with general parking and the police anyway, and creating those sort of links to be able to sort of, have those projects happening to actually crack down on it, rather than just somebody driving by,
If you're a driver, you won't want that. You want it to be visible, but you want somebody in a vehicle to be looking at vehicles, and a lot more vehicles in a shorter space of time.
you could be I'm conscious that you could be looking at a significant time delay in this enforcement work taking place if you
There could be significant costs involved in what costs are coming in and what savings for the staff costs.
I think there's the consideration that if we opt for option 1 or 2 with a view to implementing the car-based one at a later date, that is, if we're not able to, because of time restraints, offer an option 3, then our recommendation for either option 1 or 2 should be based on that car option coming in at a slightly later date. So do we take on 7 officers when a year or 2 down the line there might not be a requirement for 7 officers and we only need 4? So do we, mindful of that, do we go for option 2, employ 4 officers with the direction that the recommendation should be that we choose option 2, and the reason is because we are later on expecting the introduction of, or hoping that the introduction of, car-based enforcement to be brought into, therefore, saving some money at the early stages and not having to have redundancy costs or unnecessary training costs. But that is my thoughts. I mean, you know...
Committee, you're happy that that is the recommendation?
Yeah, that's fine. To put people on fixed-term contracts, etc., if we were minded to sort of move to another way. So that's my feelings on it, is that I want more people, but, you know, I can understand the committee's views on it. So.
I looked at this because one of the notes I made was they're kind of relying on the fact that they're going to get what Dave said. I think their option is getting an income in. It's obvious that's what they're relying on.
Yeah, but the car would.
The proposals are that it has to be cost neutral, and that's understandable as far as budget pressures go. I agree with Dave that there isn't a consideration for pushing it forward to generate income that will pay for other things in the service. We've got a massive shortage of money for potholes and highway maintenance, etc. And I'm not saying that we should be using this as a money generation, far from it, but it's a consideration down the line. This is...
The only point, if you go for option 2, what he said there was, if you're going to only really have operationally a couple of officers if they're off sick, 4. It says 4, but if they're sick, which is the sort of thing that seems to happen all the time around here, you're not going to have many. If you've got 7, you're probably going to operationally have about 5 holidays and that. I do agree with Jess, but I'm not going to vote against it the general consensus is 2. I mean, it just seems to me the problem you got, and we get this in recycling and we get the rest of it, if you're down, you're not going to be able to provide a service, which is what. But I mean, if you feel that's I just think it's problematical, because look what happened when we had 3 officers and we were trying to do a borough-wide service. He said it there. And their plan was to operate it out of the surpluses by not having officers in the other part of the department. It was cost neutral by what they were suggesting.
I'm mindful.
What I'm trying to get at, Stuart, right?
Yeah.
One vehicle and one driver can do the work of 4 or 5 people.
They wouldn't go down that line.
No, but we're not looking at that. But that would free up the other officers to do what they were originally going to do.
Trying to do 3 things with one group of officers, and 4 ain't going to do that little lot. And I really think that's why I think 7 is far, and we just have to go up a bit. I mean, I think you could put a review period in after a year to suggest we look at it after that. I would suggest 7. If you don't have 7, it's going to be it's going to be a problem.
So what I am hearing then is option 1, with a recommendation that we look to bring in car-based enforcement in the not-too-distant future. Okay, so for the in-house team, the size and scope of the options presented, so our recommendation is option 1 with a view to looking for vehicle-based in the not-too-distant. The modelling costs of the service options, I'm assuming this is where the use of consultants, etc., are going to come in.
Say though, it would have, he did say it would have cost no more if they'd got somebody from another authority to do it.
So I think this one refers more to the level of fees they've set. So he did say you can set them between 75 and 150, I think it was, and whether members were minded to do the £30 for early payment. That again was based on whether you were happy for that.
I know that the £70 that they recommended and said that other authorities are using, I was quite happy with that, but I do think that we should be introducing the 50% for early repayment, because I think that's vitally important and goes in line with our enforcement that's currently happening already, so that they're all on the same page. Do you all agree with that? Yeah?
Also, and I know this one's going to be controversial, the issue of juveniles not being issued with fines. A couple of you raised that, so.
Listen, it's not about being on a soapbox at all. What I'd like to say on this is pretty simple, really. You should be enforcing those fines between 13 and 17-year-olds. Okay, there's no point everybody now, worrying about people affording that, especially when a lot of councillors have just put up the council tax rise. It's nearly 6%. You can't just all of a sudden start playing on your conscience that no families are going to suffer. At the end of the day, this is the way that we live in a nanny state, and the only way for people to learn not to drop litter is to enforce it with fines. So if my 13-year-old drops litter and then brings me a ticket home, he's in big trouble. So I think it needs to be done. And
the issue is, Councillor Jones. Councillor Jones, sorry.
Can I just say, I sort of agree with what you're saying, Dave. I can see where you're coming from. However, if a child who's in a place where the 6% rise has made their family, they're not quite on the breadline, they're not having that extra help that they should get, and the dad's very, very strict, or the bum, and he brings home that fine, we could then end up with a child in care or a child damaged because maybe that parent then takes it out on the child, rather than if we had a good way of giving them warnings before we issued a fine. If they keep on and keep on and keep on, maybe that's the way forward. But they are juveniles, they are under 18, and we've got, as a county council, we should be protecting under 18-year-olds. Now, I'm not saying that I think a lot of the littering does come from 13 to 17-year-olds, and I do think that we should be doing more in ensuring that it doesn't happen. So I think we need more people out there helping them not to litter. But I am also mindful that because I've worked with children and social services, you do get the odd family where if they come home and they're at breaking point, that might be the point where that child then gets damaged or ends up on the street, which in the long run will cost us more.
So can I just come in? Councillor Powell, you raised the issue earlier about the youth forum being reformed, re-established, so maybe you want to make a recommendation about whether officers or the team work with the youth forum to look at possible sanctions for youths, maybe other than fines, alternatives.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my point is not the burden on families, which, I think I talked about at council, with council tax, all the rest of it. My issue is that plenty of families just will not care if your child comes home with a fine for littering. It will not impact on them in the way that you would expect it might. And I feel it's a fairly pointless thing to do. The children won't care because they won't have to pay it. The parents will, not really enforce it. It might come down, we might end up in court. But I mean, you're saying this. I mean, you're saying this as if all families are still together and the children will come home and they will see it. You know, that is not the situation that sadly that we live in. You know, plenty of kids are in care. They're shunted about from household to household. You know, putting that burden on a family, a family that doesn't exist is stupid. I think we should go the route of engagement programmes with youth because to something that they can understand. You know, sorry, yeah.
If you'd had something as small as a £10 fine, it's getting the message over to the parents that their children are doing it, and then the kids themselves are going to be thinking, we're getting a £10 fine, they can even pay it themselves then. But something small, even just need the officers to go up to these children and be able and say to them, you're having a £10 fine for what you just said. Those kids wouldn't be doing it again in a hurry. And go into the schools and tell them about it, that you will be getting these fines.
So obviously the exec member has already made a decision on that, he said, so whether you want to recommend that the exec member reconsider that decision and go with the £10, did you say?
Could we ask, sorry. Do we also say that anybody who was a persistent offender under 18 would have to do community work as well, and their families would have to be spoken to?
If the executive member is minded not to go down the line of finding that some sort of restorative justice, which is the community work type thing, advised, but you know, restorative justice is the litter picking, is the awareness raising, is available and suggested. Because otherwise, we're in this spiral. I mean, I understand the idea of the punitive thing, which is the fine, and probably no. But at the end of the day, my kids never ever did this because I shouted. Well, wouldn't be allowed to, and I understand Dave's view on the subject. But the point is, there's a lot of kids out there that get up my goat because they chuck litter all over the place, and that's down to parenting us a lot of the time, which is what Faye's saying.
And I think that we have to make recommendations based on the majority here, the majority of children, the majority. We can forever be writing policies or not making decisions based on small minorities of numbers. And the nanny state comment is something that I agree with. I do think, though, that the suggestion, if it's possible, to bring back enforcement for 13 to 17-year-olds, but at a £10, because that would allow parents to make that child pay it out of their pocket money in a very short space of time, whereas 35 or 70 is probably more of the, you know, it is. And I think the message would be, and for me, that would be the option, and I don't know what you guys think about that.
Samantha, if we don't do nothing, the taxpayer is going to end up paying for it, and so is the department. So it's up to her.
Haven't engaged on. I mean, what you said about the engagement of young people on environmental matters, which I'm totally in agreement with, and it's that particular age group who are a pain in the bottom, because once they get into a secondary school, they don't do any of this. In primary school, they're brilliantly engaged with. Once they get into secondary school, they've got exams, and this is the problem.
Clearly said, though, that they are going into the primary schools and they are engaging, so they get into 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and they're causing horrendous amounts of problems that has a cost to this council. So not taking the option to be able to do something whilst we've got the availability to do it is for me it's. You know, we need to be, because these people, the youngsters that are throwing the crisp packet at 14, is the at 25 the one that's throwing litter out the boot of the car at the British, and I think it needs to be nipped in the bud. Now I need some sort of consensus here on where we're going with this. I know that there's one or two that are not.
I can see where you're coming from, and I sort of agree. However, I wonder if we might need legal advice in order to do something like that because they're underage.
The ability is already available in the policy. It just hasn't been taken, so it must be legally okay. Yeah. So it's the availability is there to do that, and I think the reduced £10 is quite a good suggestion.
Chair, sorry, I mean, we need to bear in mind the fact that these children in primary schools, as already been said, are having education on dropping litter. Well, just because when they go to comp they decide to forget that, that's the problem doesn't go away. So it's not about whipping a kid. When they drop in litter, they need to be fined, and that's the only way of stopping it in the future, because the nanny state is not working.
I'm getting a yes for a yes, a yes.
I'm
undecided. And we've got 2 no's. So the majority is that we you know.
Can I get a note back?
Yeah. And we We're on to, so that was number 3, yeah?
That was number 5,
so
sorry.
Number 5.
Four,
Number 4, okay, so
that's number 5 now.
any other matters considered relevant by committee?
For number 5 then, I noted recommendations on greater information on the challenge process to be conveyed in person and on our website. Also printed information for environmental fines, because he said that wasn't very clear.
Yeah.
And support for vulnerable people in understanding the challenge process.
Another one, accountability. We want accountability for what they're doing, because if they're only going to target one area, you know, like they normally do now with a litter picking, we want accountability for what they're doing.
So this is... So we're looking at review as well. I mean, I remember we had the answer. Somebody asked a question about how it was going to be reviewed, and he said annually or more regularly, and we tried to drill down, and he said annually or more regularly again. So we never did have the answer. What are we recommending as far as a review period goes? 6 monthly? 6 monthly, I think, yeah.
What were the problems, what were the problems that we had with Kingdom? Because you don't want those happening again.
So you need quick review. Yeah.
Quick reviewing. There were those things when they did litter and when they did dog pooping and the rest of it. Fouling, sorry. And you make sure that we don't get those quick gain type things when they target certain groups, because it's really across the board and seems to be fair. Because it is easy to target certain groups on the litter, and you want to make sure that it's right across the age range, right across the demographic, and otherwise we're going to get that again.
I think a lot of the issue with that is that a lot of the issue with that. With Kingdom is that originally they were enforcing on privately owned, and seemed to be targeting those high footfall areas. And I think we recommended when it came to reviewing, we recommended that private land not be enforced on, and it seems that the stats in Llantarnam for Rundown Centre have dropped significantly.
And that's why it was like
absolutely.
The usual way was going after the stats. It's down the valley completely. Come on, Dave, bring your hands in.
And the only other,
Sorry, I was just going to say there was the issue that you raised about issuing fines on private land and whether you recommend the continue not issuing on private land. We've done the review one. Councillor Thomas, there was your suggestion about the sticker system and whether you wanted them to look at implementing a pilot like that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I sort of saw it, but I didn't see it. Seen it. I thought it was a marvellous idea.
Yeah. And then there was also within the communications campaign, Councillor Powell's suggestion about detailing the costing of litter so that people are aware of how much it costs and the impact.
I love it.
And they're doing that now, they're sticking out.
The only other thing that is the use of consultants. 72,700 is being spent on consultants. On consultants, 72,700.
Habitat, and then you've got the £6,000 to RTA. I mean, personally, if it was me and I was running that department, rather than banging the money out and wasting it straight away, which obviously we've got a fine from elsewhere, I would have gone there and had a chat with them first just to find out exactly what they were going to do to warrant spending that money. Personally, I would have spent more time with the police because they're the ones that's doing the job at the moment. So, I mean,
I'm mindful that we have officers that go round checking signs, lines, potholes, etc., that already know the traffic regulations, etc. Why we haven't been able to utilise that service is beyond me, when it's costing us £36,000 to do that. Faye?
Just say that he didn't answer the question about the police, did he?
Absolutely not at all.
No. Can you put something in the recommendation?
So, Emma's asked, have you got a recommendation formed on that, or do you want me to note that as concerns in the comments section below that you have concerns about the cost of the consultants that were used? That's my worry, that if you've got a recommendation to form on that, because it has already been, so what?
I mean, going back to Caerphilly, I mean, Caerphilly, I would say they've already done everything, so why aren't we spending some time with Caerphilly? Rather than wasting money, why don't we spend some time with another authority that's near enough ready to go, and the police, rather than, wasting money that we don't seem to have?
But like Councillor Powell said, they've already spent that money, so...
Well, there's £4,700 for external training, for training costs. That hasn't been spent because they haven't employed anybody yet. For me, there's a lot of that hasn't been spent, that didn't have to be spent. Training costs, as far as that could have been probably utilised through police. They're the experts here.
Well, Chair, just going on what you're saying there then about how many do we employ, why don't we find out before we waste the money on picking the option? Why don't we find out how many officers Caerphilly are doing?
That's good.
Caerphilly is the biggest authority in South Wales, so I think we wouldn't be. We can't compare that. But can I also say that perhaps we approach the police, and maybe we should ask this, because police are saying they got no time for anything at the moment, aren't they? Generally.
You could find out. You could actually work it out with Caerphilly, to be fair, because if they're only having, for example, 7 officers and they're a bigger authority, then us having option 2 and only having 4 would, it's definitely worth checking out before we go banging a load of money down the drain as usual.
Can I just say we need to go with best practice, though? Are we sure Caerphilly's doing best practice? Because we'll be wasting money in the long run if it doesn't work, if we're not going with best practice. And I'm not sure if Caerphilly are doing it as best practice. I mean, that looked good, that's signed, but we don't know all of what Caerphilly's doing.
And also don't forget we're the only authority who's doing a joint in-house, so that models are based on doing environmental enforcement as well, whereas Caerphilly are not. That's just for parking enforcement.
that was the wrong slide. I think we have to accept that the modelling was done for Torvine specifically. You know, and they said that when they came out for the 7 officers, that was enough to do an effective service, not to go above and beyond an effective service, but less than that would be quite difficult. And I think those numbers, that's why we went to a consultant. You know, we've already paid for that consultant now, you know, to come up with those figures for us. So I think it would be kind of ridiculous not to take their advice when we've, you know, spent that much money to buy in that expert advice.
The modelling that was described to me, or to us before, was that RTA have done this multiple times with other authorities, and what I got, it was tweaked to fit Torvine. So there was no full-on designated model that was completely written for Torvine. It was tweaked. Yeah.
Even on that now, we're looking at the numbers. My concern is even with the blue badge thing, I mean, we're not even utilising that, because a lot of blue badge park, you know, in awkward places, and we're not even challenging that. So that should be a recommendation.
Can I just say we have to be careful as a council that we don't step on vulnerable people's toes and make their lives harder. So as much as we should go after certain things, other things we have to look at the law and be very, very careful about.
The point is, we need to look at it objectively, and that's an objective to be looked at, because a lot of these people who drive in their blue badge things are not doing it with a person in the car. I know that.
Sorry to come back on you, Richard. He did say, though, that that's not the remit of our parking enforcement officers. That's who run the blue badge scheme to enforce that.
Yeah, but I'm missing the point. It's still a parking issue, whether they're blue badge or not.
What I do normally, I'll type those up formally.
See what we've got in the bag so far.
Yeah, so to go back then to number 1, the aims and objectives of the proposed enforcement policies. So that goes back to the comments within the policies on the waiting periods and clearer definition, also on the wheels outside of parking bays and clarity on the definitions, and that to be go forward through the training. In regards to 2 and 3, you preferred option 1, but to look at the use of the car registration, vehicle registration. Yeah. Then on number 4, the fixed penalty charge levels that are proposed, you were satisfied with the levels of fines they propose and the reduction for early payments. And then also for the policy on reviewing, issuing a fine to 13 to 17-year-olds, you would like the exec member to reconsider and look at the potential for issuing fines of £10, and also to work with the youth forum on engagement. Then on number 5, you had greater information on the challenge process to be conveyed in person and on the website, and printed information for environmental fines and support for vulnerable people. Continue not to issue fines for private land. Reviews to take place 6 monthly rather than annually. A sticker system similar to that used in Caerphilly to be explored. Communication campaign to include information on the cost of littering, how much it costs for us to clear it up, etc. And also Councillor Jones raised a recommendation before he had to leave about reporting to police, enforcement officers reporting on to police when instances issue it. Sorry, Councillor Thomas, I missed out your one about an exact date on when zero tolerance will come in.
I asked them also earlier about amassing data, because we were missing that earlier. I don't know if we can frame something around that, because we didn't seem to have accurate data of any of this stuff.
Well, it won't be.
No. It was the collection of decent data, especially the car parking one, which seemed to be particularly bad. The police had amassed it, if you noticed, and we said, what was that other stuff in the car parking stuff? Yeah, so actually, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So I think the collection of data that could take us forward on this, you know, I think we have to state the obvious sometimes on this, sometimes. So we can review it. And I've just said that it would be a good thing to state it sometimes, that we need to collect. This is a good way of, yeah.
There were two other things I was thinking of, and one of them was as soon as the comms team have looked at advertising this out to the public that we're taking over and what's going to happen, that we get to see what they've planned to do on that. And then there was Mr Chew's idea of getting a member to go to the street scene meetings. Yeah.
Formulate something around the use of consultants. So, as not as a recommendation, but as concerns underneath, as a comment. Are you okay with that? The use of consultants. I mean, it's £72,700, and I think it would be amiss of us to actually not highlight that.
Why are we using it all?
I agree if there's some other way of doing it. It was just that he did say on the one case that it wouldn't have cost any less to get somebody in from another authority who's got the expertise.
Chair.
I don't know about the 26,000, I wasn't sure about that bit.
It's actually in total, it's 78k, isn't it? Just over. Including the RTA. Yeah, so obviously money's about.
Could we ask a question? Would it have cost any less if we hadn't used consultants? Whether we'd gone to other authorities or other people with expertise, we would still have to pay them. Can we ask them?
Thank you for all of those. We have some formulated recommendations and comments to make. Our next meeting is on the 10th of April, and we'll be looking at the local housing strategy. A copy of a performer is being distributed as I talk, and I'd like you to see if there's anything that we can add for inclusion in the report. And have you got any suggestions on who we can invite? I'll give us a minute to read this a second.
If members would like, you can invite the executive member along, yeah?
Could we ask not only the housing experts or whoever are the housing experts, but could we ask somebody from somewhere like Greenpeace? Not Greenpeace, sorry. Someone from Friends of the Earth, sorry, who, because of where we put housing, just to talk about, needing housing versus where we put housing. Yeah. If it's not.
Yeah, Chase, can we invite David, Councillor Daniels?
Have we got somebody from planning coming as well?
If it's not going to be someone from Friends of the Earth, could it be someone from Environment, just about where we put our housing and how we manage putting the housing happened in the
Get a volunteer. Suggest Planning Aid Wales. So the guy from that's brilliant. I've seen him at County Council.
Are we getting Melin in as well from Avon, did you say?
Melin can't attend, yeah. Right, okay, thank you very much. It's been a brilliant meeting yet again. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I close the meeting.